This conference will now be recorded.
I'd like to welcome you to this presentation on the Acumatica Payroll module. My name is John Wiles. I'm a senior consultant with DSD Business Systems. Today, I'd like to break this discussion down into the first thing is some cloud-based services that the payroll module integrates with. Then we'll do a quick review of the payroll configuration options. Then we'll take a look at how an employee's payroll is set up. And then we'll demonstrate the weekly payroll process, which consists of 4 steps: creating a batch, calculating earnings, deductions, and taxes. And then we process the checks and direct deposit. And then we release or post the payroll to the general ledger. The 2 cloud-based services that payroll uses, one is Symmetry. It's a tax engine. It covers all the United States, territories, and local taxes. And it is a hosted service that Acumatica provides at no additional charge. The other cloud-based service is Atrix. That's the tax form engine. Allows you to e-file your taxes for both federal and state, and they certify all the forms. You do have to have a subscription to Atrix in order to do the e-filing. Okay, so let's take a quick look inside the module. This is a dashboard for payroll, where the payroll clerk can see in a glance where things stand in terms of different activities. Workspace for payroll, it's an integrated module inside of Acumatica. And integrates with time and expense, with the general ledger, and also with project. So the first thing I'd like to do is take a look at some of the configurations. We'll start with the earning type codes. The earning codes, there are several that come out of the box. They're configurable. You can have any number of them that you need. Let's take a look at the regular hours. And you'll notice over here on the right-hand side, we have check boxes where we can identify whether workman's comp applies or whether this earning type accrues time off. The earnings type, in this case, is salary, but you can also have overtime, piecework, amount time-based, and time off. You identify what type of wage it is, whether it's regular, supplemental, or tips. And in the reporting type, you identify where it's going to be reported on the W-2. You identify also for the reporting on taxes. In this case, we're going to use the Symmetry tax engine, but you can make exceptions or exclude things from the tax engine calculation. All right, so next, let's take a look at earnings and deductions. Again, earnings, deductions, and benefits are completely configurable. It comes with a few out of the box. Take a look at the 401k. You notice over here on the right-hand side, deduction could be a garnishment. Could also be applicable to the American Care Act, Affordable Care Act, I'm sorry. And it can also just be a direct payable benefit, such as a car being provided to an employee. The contribution type, you notice that this one is 401k is both a deduction and a contribution. So that gives you a separate tab to set up the employee part of the deduction as well as the employer part of the deduction. So you don't have to have 2 different benefit codes. When you do select something like the Affordable Care Act, it adds an additional tab for you to be able to configure that. You'll notice here that we have a vendor for this benefit, and Acumatica provides the ability to automatically create the AP bill after you run payroll, excuse me, so that then accounts payable can, pay the funds to the appropriate vendor. Next, I'd like to take a look at the overtime rules. Yep, we're going to leave that the way it is. And you can set up any number of overtime rules. You'll notice you can, what type, whether it's just overtime or double time. The multiplier, you can have it applicable to specific periods of time, either day or weekly. It can be only applicable to a single day if you want. It can be applicable to a certain state, union, or project. Let's take a look now at the union. If your employees are members of unions, you can identify that here. You can set up the labor categories and their rates. You can configure deductions or benefits as required by the union rules. You also notice that we have a vendor field in the union here so that after payroll, you can produce a check to forward the dues to the union or whatever other payments are required. Next will be pay groups that we configure. The pay group is a group of employees paid on the same schedule. So in other words, paying people weekly or bi-monthly. And you can have as many people in a pay group as you want. Another configurable thing is certified projects. So if you have a project that requires certified payroll, you identify that in the project when you set it up, and that makes it available here, where you can set up the earning rates specific to a labor item and that project. And again, like union, you can configure the deductions and benefits and/or fringe that are required with the project. Another configurable item is work locations. So in our system here, we have a Washington State Bellevue location and a Virginia McLean location. So these are the places where the employees are going to work. And this is where the tax engine is going to generate the appropriate taxes for the work location. And speaking of tax, tax maintenance, this is the tax codes that are used in the Symmetry tax engine. We have an update taxes here, this button. So if I open up a new work location for the company and add that in the previous configuration, I would come in here and update taxes, and it would pull in the appropriate taxes for that location. So you can see we have federal, Virginia, and Washington State. You also notice here that we have vendors we can put in so that, again, after we've run payroll, we can generate the AP bill to pay the government or state, whatever the tax jurisdiction is. You also notice that we have some tax settings that, again, will come in from the Symmetry tax engine, but can be configured for any local exceptions. Okay, so that's the configuration items. Next thing I'd like to show is the employee payroll settings. Okay, so here's our list of employee payroll. We'll pick Maxwell Baker here. This settings here are highly confidential. Acumatica uses role-based security to ensure that only the appropriate personnel have the ability to get into this information. You notice here we have an employee record. Acumatica has a standard employee record that's used for a number of the modules. And what's important here is that the payroll clerk can get to the employee record If you set up an employee, you set up the address information on the employee record. You can also identify a couple of the other fields here. And then when you add an employee to payroll, you select the employee record and it completes the information here so that you don't have to do duplicate entry. Another configuration is the employee class. So here we've defined a salaried employee and we've identified various pieces of information, including the work locations for this employee class. You can have as many employee classes as you need. And that way, so you add the employee to the payroll settings, you pick the class, and as you can see, all these configurations come in from the class, and you have the ability to override a specific class setting if that doesn't apply to this particular employee. Otherwise, it's fairly quick to be able to set up an employee. Again, here's the work location for the employee, and of course, the address determines the residence. On the second tab here, we have the tax settings. So this is everything that comes from the W-4 is used to produce the W-2. On the taxes tab, these are the taxes that this employee would be subject to. And again, if there's any particular exceptions or differences that can be set here. On the compensation tab, we have the salary information. You notice it has start and end dates. So if there's a adjustment in their salary, it can be configured in advance and the calculation engine will pick up the appropriate compensation based on the date that the the payroll is run. On the deductions and benefits, again, all these things can come in from the default class, so they don't have to be individually set up for the individuals. But some of the settings, like the contribution percent, can be changed. You can also notice here that we can have things start and stop. So if they make a change, you can have the effective dates. On the paid time off, these PTO banks, again, this comes in from the class default. So you can identify which ones are applicable for this employee. If it differs, you can put in some front loading if you need to. On the payment settings, this is where you determine whether the employee is getting a physical check or whether they're going to be ACH. And you can identify where, for ACH, what the accounts are and if there's going to be a split between multiple accounts, either by amount or by percent. So that is the payroll settings for the employee. So what we'd like to do now is process a weekly payroll. And that consists of 4 steps. We're going to create a batch. We're going to calculate payroll. Then we're going to print the checks. And then we're going to release the transactions. So to start a new payroll batch, we can use this tile right up here and do a new payroll batch. No, I don't want to change anything about Maxwell's record. Okay, so we have a new batch here. We can identify whether this batch is going to be a regular batch or whether it's a special, like if you were doing a bonus checks. We select the pay group that we're going to pay that we mentioned earlier. So I'm going to do a weekly payroll. We identify the pay period that the payroll is going to be for. So in this case, it'll be period number 36, August 23rd to the 29th. And we're going to put in a little description here so that when this gets written out to the project, if appropriate, we identify that this is weekly payroll for ending at 8/29. Okay, so Now we've got the summary section set, so now what we're going to do is add the employees from this pay group. So we click on the add employees. It brings up everybody in that group. You notice over here, we can, if this was a salaried, we can do a quick pay where it just produces the checks. But in this case, since we're doing a weekly, we're going to pull the time activities, which are going to come from time and expense. So the employees have been entering their time and expense. If you have a time clock system, time can be imported into time card. So that would be available to bring into here. And there are also ISV solutions that provide other ways to bring time into Acumatica. So we're just going to select the time activities and we'll hit add and close. And it will add those employees here. Now I can review how many hours the employees brought in. You notice Pat Farrell has no hours because Pat doesn't use time card. But I can enter time for an employee using this earnings detail. So I highlight Pat's record and I hit the earnings details. And I'm going to add the time that Pat worked. So on 8/24, he had some regular hours. He worked out of his Bellevue location. It was 8 hours. Oops, 8. All right, and we're going to, Pat worked on a project, AA project, and task 1. Now I can copy my selected entry, change the date for Tuesday. And on Tuesday, I'm going to say that he worked 10 hours. You can either enter in regular and put in 10 hours, or you could select overtime and put 2 hours and another line with the 8 hours for Tuesday. Excuse me, but I'm going to let the calculation engine calculate the overtime for us. And that's all I'm going to put in. Pat only worked Monday and Tuesday. So now we have the 18 hours that he worked. For this batch, we can determine if all the benefits and deductions apply. Again, if it was a bonus, I'd probably not, I'd uncheck them. And the same thing with overtime. If this were a bonus or special payroll, we probably wouldn't have any overtime calculated. So now we're going to take the batch off hold and we're going to release it. All right. Takes a moment here because it's generating the actual initial checks for all the employees in this batch. Now you can configure, as many batches as you need. This was weekly. If it was also time to do the bi-weekly this week, I could go create a batch for bi-weekly. But if we open up a check, we'll notice here for Pat's check that it's in the status of needs calculation. And it has the entries that we put in. Now we could come in here and do the calculation for this one check, and then after doing that, we could print the check, and then we could release it. But most frequently, everybody does everything as a process. So now that we have the batch done, let's go process, calculate the checks for everybody in our batches. So we're going to do a calculate. It brings up the checks that are in our batches. We'll select all the checks and we will process them. So at this point, the calculation engine is calculating overtime, all the deductions and benefits, as well as going out to the Symmetry tax engine and calculating the taxes applicable for each of the employees. You also notice that the little scheduler is up here on this screen. So this could actually be set to perform automatically, let's say at the end of the day, whatever batches have been released, it would automatically do the processing, on that schedule. So this should be done here in just a moment. Here we go. So they're all processed. And so the next step, the third step in payroll processing is to either print the checks or to process the direct deposits. In this case, everybody in our weekly group is paid by check. So we're going to pay them out of the appropriate cash account. And we're going to print all the checks. So we'll do a process all. And you'll also notice here that printing the checks can also be automated on a schedule. So it's going to bring up our checks. Now, checks are a standard form inside Acumatica, so they're completely configurable. This is, how it comes out of the box. If we skip ahead here to Pat's check, you can see that he got 2 hours of overtime and paid 16 hours of regular. So the overtime was calculated. You can see the benefits and the deductions and the taxes. So at this point, you could print the checks. And then if everything's printed properly, the final step is to release the checks, release payroll to the general ledger. So we go into process payroll documents. Again, we process all. And this process can be automated and scheduled so that it can be run automatically and doesn't have to be manually kicked off. Time and any other costs that are applicable will flow to projects when you do this release. So it should only be another moment. There we go. So you notice that I had put Pat's time into a project when I entered it. So if we go to our project and open up AA project, you'll notice on the balances tab here that we picked up some actual labor, $655. If we wanted to see what was in those transactions, here we go. We can see that we got the earnings, we got the taxes, we got the benefits all flowing through the actual costs to the project. Okay, so I'd like to recap the payroll processing. We first started the process by creating a batch. Then we did our process payroll and did our calculation. Then we printed our check, and finally we released the payroll batch to the general ledger. A couple other topics I'd like to cover real quickly is government reporting. If you go into government reporting, you can pick the federal forms that you may need to file. And once you click on one of these, it's going to open up the other automated service, Atrix, and it is integrated with the Acumatica, so we'll bring in the appropriate data and populate the form, at which point you could e-file it. You can also come in here and Pick your state and choose whatever form is required to be submitted at this point in time. And again, it's integrated with the Atrix. Another item here is the create liabilities. So as I showed you, a lot of these settings and configuration had vendors. So here are all the things that can be produced at this point in time. So if I just take a look at tax, I could come in here and I see I have to pay the IRS a bunch of taxes. So I can just highlight those, do a process. You also know that notice that this screen has a scheduler. So I could schedule this process, and that way everything from the payroll processing will automatically go into accounts payable and produce an AP bill that accounts payable can then take over and pay. So if we go into our bills and adjustments, we'll notice here that we have this IRS government payment bill ready to be taken off hold and approved and paid. So in conclusion, I mean, what we discussed was the cloud-based services, Symmetry tax engine, as well as the Atrix form. We also configured the payroll options. We took a look at the employee payroll setup. We ran through a weekly payroll demo, and then we took a quick look at the liabilities, ability to produce an AP bill for payrolls, and also government reporting. So this concludes our demonstration, and thank you.